When we're young, we tend to think of ourselves as invincible. It's humbling when that falls apart, when that's not true. For me, I was in seminary when I made some regrettable decisions, and so I traveled home to tell my parents about it. And you know, it's hard to see anything in front of you. It's hard to identify any type of future. You're just present in your brokenness. You're just alive in that moment, and you're worried, you know. Everything that I had tried so hard to keep together, it was falling apart. And as I grasped for things, I couldn't hold all these pieces together. They just were crumbling. This nothing can break me, invincible facade that I tend to wear, you know. My mask was coming off. I was being found out, you know. And I've been sad, but not desperate. I've been hurt before, but not broken. And even thinking about it, you know, I've been weary, but not drained. Not like this. I kept thinking as I was talking to my folks, and as I was just seeing myself crash. Could anything good come from this?
What good thing could come from this? It's the very question the early disciples were asking Jesus. And there's a story about it with two sisters and one brother. Jesus is a close friend to their family, and one day the brother gets very ill and he passes away. Word gets sent to Jesus, but he's too late in arriving. Lazarus is dead, Jesus is late, and the sisters are weeping. They thought this man from Nazareth could do something, but he's too late. They've been sad before, but not desperate. Hurt, but not broken. Weary, but not drained. What good could come from this? Knowing something that the sisters don't, Jesus asks to go see Lazarus. And it's not to the hospital, it's to the graveyard, to the place of death and decay. Jesus wants to go and stand in it, be knee deep in the muck and the mire. And I don't know if the sisters realize it, but the other religious leaders aren't going there. Where he is standing, no one else is wanting to stand. And in that presence of death and mourning, Jesus weeps with them. It's not the same tears that the sisters are crying, but we're told Jesus wept.
To say the least, that night was awkward. Having to face my parents and confess all this failure. Honestly, all this brokenness, I just felt ashamed. And there's always that point in those times when you know talking can't accomplish anything else. So all we had left was our emotion. And I just kind of walked over to my mom and I curled up in her arms and I just cried. 25 years old, crying like an infant. And my dad, he was sitting on the other side of the room, and I could sense his disappointment. I think he was upset. I think he was embarrassed. I mean, he was hurt too. And he walked over to me and he picked me up in his arms and lifted me up and just held me. And I stood there and I kind of fell into his chest, and as he held me, he began to whisper into my ear, "Jake, it's gonna be all right." And he held me with the type of confidence that even though my dad was broken, even though he was hurt too, he held me and whispered into me with some type of confidence that said he knew what it was going to take. that he knew that we could resurrect out of this moment, you know. And so when he cried, his tears were different. And as I cried, his posture was different. I think back to that moment, something I'll never forget is that we both were crying together. But Dad cried with a hope I didn't have.
They get to the tomb, and with tear-stained cheeks, and in spite of warnings about the stench, Jesus asked them to remove the stone that was covering Lazarus' tomb. There's all sorts of doubters that day, and they're all yelling at Jesus. Jesus, don't you know that the dead can't be raised? Don't you know that death has won? This is just the final nail in your coffin. What good could come from this? Jesus, not even you can raise this man from the dead. But all those doubters, it's only fuel for what Jesus knows to be true. He knows that the glory of God bows down to nothing. So rather than listening, he toes the edge of the tomb. He looks into that cave of death, and he offers a prayer to heaven of thanks, and then he calls Lazarus' name. He says, "Lazarus, come forth." And I really have no idea how all this works, but the dead man comes forward. He comes out living and moving and breathing just because of the voice of Jesus calling his name. He comes out and he's walking out of the cave in his grave clothes, and Jesus commands them to remove. He says, unbind him and let him go. And those clothes that were wrapped around him, reminding him of this permanent death, they're removed like chains, they're taken off. Lazarus has been set free.
Release, freedom, victory. Isn't that what we all want? Isn't that what we're all fighting for? I know for me, it's exactly what I was seeking. But I think I was looking in all the wrong places, and it didn't bring me anything but brokenness, honestly. But in time, in the love of my family, in the faithfulness of the church, in the faithfulness of God, I know I began to hear the same words that Lazarus heard. Here's my favorite part of this story, is that as I remember back, as I know the Lord was calling into my cave, He didn't use the name of my failures. He didn't use labels or the names of my mistakes. He didn't say, hey, hypocrite, or hey, burnout, or hey, hyperactive. The things I've heard from my friends and things I heard from others, He didn't use those names. He used my God-given name. He yelled into the cave, which had become my tomb, hey, Jacob, come forward. You know, those words still work. They still resurrect. They did for me. And in that moment, my grave clothes came off. I felt this release and this freedom. And Jesus standing there at the edge of my tomb that become my cave, knee deep in muck and mire. And if He can stand in my mess and call me forward, I just know that He can stand in your mess too. And He can call you forward. You know, Jesus at once is restoring, He's redeeming, He's reordering. And this just isn't for Lazarus. This isn't just for me or just for you. It's for all of us. Redemption, restoration, for all of us. Every single one of us.
This story isn't really about Lazarus. It's about God's Son and what He came to do. He came to defeat death and to resurrect. It's in His death that we die too, but it's in his resurrection that we rise to. We've been made new creations. We're a chosen people who have been called to show what his redeeming action does, to show what his redeeming love does, to be living examples of victorious life to the world, so that they will see that the Lord still resurrects. In 1 Peter, there's a great verse that says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light." We were meant for more than to be beat down and dragged down and wrapped up in the sin of our grave clothes. God is calling us out of this darkness. And because of that, we can be made whole. We can be pure. We can live resurrected lives. He has chosen us. He's calling us, calling you to tell that story of resurrection. We are God's chosen, set apart people to tell God's good story everywhere.